Quick update on the Big G. Done a little work. Put Mothra together. There's 2 more pieces. He's got little antler feelers to come out. I'm not going to put those on until right before I paint. They don't need seam filling or anything. One nasty seam running right down his spine. Okay, lighting's not good. You guys can't see that. Now you can. You can see that seam. And the problem is, there is a good texture on the outside of this. It's a subtle texture. It's the kind of texture I've seen some of you Maquet people putting on the outside of your armor. And when I fix that seam, I'm going to lose that texture. And I just know I am. And the seam runs right across his mouth, which is going to be nasty to fix. So Mothra is probably going to get set aside because this is optional for the diorama. If he gets done, he goes in. If he doesn't, he doesn't. Okay? By the way, some of you might have noticed that seam is raised. I switch glues. I have been using Tamiya extra thin cement or Tamiya regular cement. It just depends on what I'm gluing together. The regular cement holds better than the extra thin, but it takes longer to dry, and you have to apply it, then put the parts together. Extra thin, you put the parts together and just wipe it on, and capillary action sucks it into the parts and glues. I'm using something a little hotter. What I mean by hotter is it melts the plastic more. And by clamping down and holding, I get the plastic squirting out of the seam like I did here on this. Let's let you guys get a better look at it. Yeah, you can see it there in the good lighting. I get a ridge of plastic along the seam. So now all I have to do is sand that down, and I'm not going to have a seam whatsoever. Okay, and I've got it going across the front of Mothra here too. And that's one of the reasons why I switched to this hotter glue, so that it would do this for me. Because seam filling on the Big G is going to suck. Going to suck bad. I've been putting together some of his arms. Okay? First off, there were a lot of flash in these hands. Now, I don't have I cleaned the flash out of there. I spent an hour giving this guy a manicure last night, getting all of that flash out of that hand, and that hand came out pretty good. You can see the seam running along that arm, and I'm going to have to be really careful about getting that out of there. As you can also see, the detail on the model is pretty good, and that detail runs right up to those seams. Oops, sorry. You can see the detail is pretty good, and it runs right up to those seams. So I'm going to have some fun cleaning those seams up and keeping them somewhat pristine. If all goes to worse and I just file them flat, I'm going to have to replicate that detail, which I don't think will be too hard if I can use some Abe's epoxy sculpt and get it in thin enough snakes to put it along those seams so I can replicate that rubber ribbing. And here's the other hand. Okay? Now, one of the things that were bad about the hands, there's 2 things that are bad about the hands on this model. One of them had webbing all the way across the finger here, between the finger and the thumb, and that webbing was thick. I mean, this wasn't flash. Another problem is, look at the palm. It's just missing. And it's that way on both hands. So I'm going to have to fill that in with some Aves. This one has a better wrist than the other one does. If you look at the other one, there's a gap there in the wrist, and that's just going to have to go. In fact, looking at the seam on this hand, I may just have to fill in along there because that's too big of a gap there. Whereas on this hand, I may be able to just file it and get it smoothed. I tried to make sure the arms lined up properly when I glued them, and you'll notice that this one did on the inside but not on the outside edge. You can see that. Model kits like this of monsters are going to have these issues. Okay? There's too much detail on the kit. The detail runs up to the seams. You know, the Polar Lights version of this is 10 times worse. That's why I didn't bother to build this one. Well, I'm going to get off here, quit ranting. I'm going to jump in and get his feet put together, maybe even his main body put together. It goes together pretty quickly. It's just fixing the seams and stuff is going to be the bad part. Not building this thing, it's only 20 pieces. Not many pieces at all. I'm going to have to delay on him some because I need the feet for the diorama, and I haven't even mapped out the diorama yet. The feet are going to, I need them so I can put stomp marks in the ground. Now, I do have another one of these kits that hasn't even started, so I could have built 2 Godzilla clones, but we've never seen that in the movies. But that might be a solution to doing the feet in the diorama. I've also thought about trying to make casts of those feet so that I can finish this model, use the cast for the stomp marks. We'll see. Okay? If I make cast, I don't have to make a full cast, and it doesn't have to be detailed. It only has to be the bottom of the foot. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. Okay? So I just need it for impressions. So we'll see. I got a day or two to think about it. If it starts holding me up, I'm going to do the cast or something like that. I've got quite a bit of Aves epoxy sculpt for this thing. I think I bought a 5-pound set, so I can just sculpt away on anything I want. We'll see if I do that or not, but that's the thought. I've also got some ideas for replicating these textures. If I need to do it, I'll show it to you. Be back in a bit. People, another short update. I got about an hour and a half worth of work in today, maybe 2. Big G is in the clamps of doom here. If you're a Futurama fan, the clamps. Can I give him the clamps? Well, anyhow, he's been given the clamps. Must have had a bad headache with this clamp. Let's start pulling them off. Reason for the clamps, and I talked about this earlier, is that I am using a really hot glue. And by clamping down really hard on the model, you can squeeze some of the plastic out through the seam. Now, I'm going to move the camera down a little bit because it'll be focused on the model better. I'm going to zoom in some. I've been learning that if I zoom in too much, it's when my camera has a hard time focusing. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but I can sure feel it. Some of that plastic did squeeze out of those seams. And that's going to make it easier to work with. Now, there's some trouble spots on his main body here. Forehead is bad. There's a lot of detail in there, and there's definitely a crack in that seam. His nose is particularly bad, and the mouth area here. There are 2 or 3 separate parts for the mouth. They're going to go on near last because I'm going to paint them before I put them on. And I'm going to have to mask off that whole mouth. Another trouble spots are right here when his back ribs fins start coming up. That's going to be some troublesome spots there too. Good thing is this is one solid piece, so the seam lines are running over to the side, and those are going to be easy to hide. Real easy to hide due to the nature of how this kit is. It's a little loose down. Yeah, I didn't get the glue down here right, so I'm going to have to re-glue that in a minute. Well, anyhow, main body. Let me zoom out a tad bit so that we can see some of the other stuff I've done. Okay, we have one of his legs put together. Seam line runs right along there, and it's going to be highly visible. And we have feet together. Problem with the feet is this. Okay. Of course, the camera wants to focus on everything but the feet because I zoomed in too far, and I can't bring the feet to the camera with the lighting I have set up. I was complaining about the Polar Lights kit. I've watched Model Man Tom's review of it. The Polar Lights kit does what this does not. My seam line's running right along here on the leg. You can see that detail runs right up to that seam. And if I'm really careful with that seam, I can probably make it vanish and preserve most of that detail. It's going to be tricky, and I'm going to try to do it. If not, I've got some ideas on how to get that detail back. Feet. Detail just vanishes along that seam. It's not even. The seam doesn't run well around the toes. Feet are horrible. Okay? Same thing's true with the other foot. The seam doesn't run well around the side, and it's really bad around the underside of the toes, but not the upper side of the toes. There was a lot of flash on these toenails, by the way. I had to remove a lot of flash on the toenails. I have his other leg done too. Alright, so if I want to do a little bit of dry fitting, and the kit holds together fairly well for the dry fitting, I think. Oh, this foot doesn't want to stay in there. I'm just trying to get an idea how tall this thing's going to be. So let me zoom this out a bit, because it's boring to watch the back of my hand. There I got the 2 legs set up. And they're going to go on the body about so. Of course, everything doesn't want to cooperate. I was thinking this thing was going to be pretty posable. And dry fitting the legs on here, no. She's not going to be posable at all. Let's get this back on camera so you guys can see it. Dry fitting the legs on here, this thing is not posable at all. These legs go on one way and one way only. Good thing is, the seam along here is in a natural fold of the body. So it might be possible to hide that seam with little or no effort. Okay? There we go. Now we got the other leg on there. Arms. Long arm. Let's see if the arms are going to be posable on here. Yes, the arms are somewhat posable. So I'll be able to move the arms up and down however I feel like. That's a good thing. I haven't built the tail yet. The tail is in 16 pieces. Is that right? No, 8 pieces. And it looks like the tail is going to be somewhat posable. I'll get that done tomorrow night. And I should have this thing ready for seam filling by the end of tomorrow night. Except for I won't have his mouth done. That mouth is going to be the last thing I do. Along with these fins, his big radiated fins on the back. Those are going to go on last too. Simply because they don't need to be in my way when I'm doing seam filling. Okay? So I've almost got all the sub-assemblies done on the Big G. That's surprisingly how fast this is going together. That's what happens when you got a nice model. Unlike that 747, which was not a nice model. It was a bad model. It needs to be locked away. So it can't hurt other models and give them bad ideas. But anyhow, there's my update on the Big G. She's coming along very nicely. I should have all the sub-assemblies done again, like I said, tomorrow. And then I can start dealing with these seams. These seams are liable to take a week or two. That's the bad part. The good part is I can work on the seams a little bit at a time, and I don't have to rush them. So there you go. Back with an update bit and later.